Here with Dr. Vanetta LaRosa, founder of Helping Hands Children's Services, SIU grad, and then Todd Blyleven, Scout Hub, but was on with me last summer, and then Chris Maliszewski played for me at Iowa and then coached with me at Iowa. So Walking Tall Foundation. So thanks for coming on with me, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're excited to be here to say the least.
This is a wonderful example of the baseball community and also how the universe works to get people connected. And, how did you all get connected?
I guess I'll take that one. Um,
Yeah.
it it started with you, and if not for you, Ryan, I wouldn't have met Todd and would not have met Vanetta and the three of us, and the Walking Tall movement would not be. But as I've said to you offline and have said in some private conversations, for those that don't know, I was in a mass shooting on July 4th, 2022. And you had the privilege of having Todd on your podcast a couple years previous, and knew his story. And so after my experience, you thought enough of me and my situation to reach out to Todd and ask him to be a resource for what I was about to experience. And ever since that day, July 7th, 2022, Todd and I have been best of buds and inseparable in many instances. And then Dr. LaRosa came to us through the Scout Hub and some of her searches to help her son get seen. He's a recruitable athlete now. And the story is too long for listeners to hear, but if not for you, I don't know where I'd be personally, and the Walking Tall movement probably wouldn't have been established.
Yeah. No, I second that. I think, baseball, number one, brought us all together. Right. And like, Chris mentioned, I did that podcast with you last year, and I was honored to be able to be a resource to reach out to Chris, knowing what he was going through after my incident in Las Vegas, and just being there as a brother, as a resource, as a power force to help him what he was going through. And again, your introduction, Ryan, to Chris has really forged, Chris and I, our relationship, which has been awesome. I've gained a new brother. And then Vanetta, Dr. LaRosa and her reaching out to me through my work, through the Scout Hub. It's just been an amazing thing. But, Dr. LaRosa also has a connection to baseball as well. Growing up with her dad and her boys too. So,
Indeed. Baseball is my life. And if not for the graciousness of Todd, one fine day when I was looking at the Scout Hub and I loved it and I couldn't pay for it, on a Sunday morning, he called me up and said, "How can I help you?" And I thought it was unreal that a person would be so kind and give their time to me and help me out with this wonderful tool that he has created. And after I put my son's information in, and Todd saw some of his abilities and metrics and is running a 6.360 and all this great stuff that he can do. He said, your son is really actually very talented and has great potential, and started to give me some advice in that domain. And soon after, I was asked if I wanted to join this wonderful movement to improve the mental health of this great country, given that we are all suffering tremendously. And I said, absolutely, sign me up. I'm there to help in any way that I can. And here we are.
Dr. LaRosa, Chris is in Illinois, Todd's in Texas. Are you in Illinois also?
I'm in New York.
Okay, sure. All that. How did you get from SIU to New York?
Oh, well, I was always a Long Islander, as we say.
Strong Island,
And
Strong Island, right? I coached summer ball in
right.
New York one year, and two girls that lived below us. I lived across the street from St. Rose, but they were from Long Island, so that's how I know it's called Strong Island.
I actually went to St. Rose. It was my.
I lived right across the street from St. Rose at Albany. That was the wildest summer ever. I actually paid money. I paid them that summer. I lost money that summer to coach.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, we love our baseball here. That's for sure. Vito is on a team now called Next Level. And he's doing very well. He's hurt now, unfortunately. But yeah. I lived here my whole life. And then I was fortunate enough to get into a fantastic PhD program on a full scholarship and a doctoral fellowship, and trained under some of the best people in the world for the stuff that I do. And so I lived as a Saluki for a few years in Carbondale and enjoyed every moment of it.
Yeah, I survived that summer on dollar Labatt's Blues and 25-cent wings. Every bar in Albany, they would rotate. So one bar would have 25-cent wings. So that was the only way I survived that summer, was to rotate the different bars and restaurants that had 25-cent wings back then.
Love it.
Sounds like my life in Carbondale. Although I was a PhD student, I found my way out to the party scene. It was voted #1 that year. What can I do? I didn't plan it.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And Todd, I appreciate you, because we had a pre-call together just to kind of go over our episode. And I did bring up the Vegas shooting, and I was like, hey, we don't have to talk about this. And so I do appreciate that you are willing to share, because, again, you just never know. And, in a roundabout way, that helped Chris, because as soon as he and I were talking on the phone, and he was really struggling, and I was just concerned for Chris as a friend. We've known each other forever, so I was like, okay, I need to get those two connected, because you had been through it. You don't ever want anybody to have to go through that. But when you look at the landscape of America right now, we're dealing with it more and more. So, we don't want that to happen, but it might happen. So we need to develop resources for people able to get connected so they don't end up hurting themselves.
Yeah, you're so right. When I got back from Las Vegas after going through what I went through, I got a phone call from a random stranger that was actually, he's connected through my dad. So similar situation. He reaches out to my dad to try to figure out how I am doing. My dad says, hey, reach out to him. He could probably use your guidance. He was a combat vet, done 3 tours, a really stud in the military per se, but he told me what my next 72 hours was going to look like. And then helped me and became one of my rocks. And so when you reached out, of course I had to be in that position to try to help Chris, go through his. And you're right. We're going through something right now we've never experienced as a country. And social media has really amplified everything. We've got kids, letting law enforcement and other responders know when things are happening before our own alarm systems and things, as Chris might, allude to a little bit later. But you have to be there for someone. We had a tragedy in North Texas here recently, and where, people lost their lives. And you think about not only the families that are experiencing that loss, the first responders. I was with 2 fire chiefs the night of that incident. And to hear their crackling in their voice on what's happening and their concern with their entire embodiment of all of their employees, the workers, that, anybody in the malls, everybody that's affected, that had to duck and cover, run for your life, shelter with your children. I was reached out by a mom recently. She had 3 kids there. It was a connection through another friend on Facebook, through social media again. Asked if I could just reach out to this woman just to give her some guidance on EMDR therapy and things like that I'm hoping we go into a little bit. But we have to be there for people. You cannot take this on your own. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to talk about your own feelings, what you're feeling on the inside. It's okay to be pissed. It's okay to be upset. But you need guidance, and we as a society need to make sure that we're reaching out to anybody that's affected with any trauma, any mental health issues. We just got to be there. You can't just leave it in the closet anymore.
And the trauma surgeons. I saw a video the other day of a trauma surgeon talking, and it was like, hey, I am worn out. Like, I'm done. Like, you can only do this so much, where it's the same thing over and over, where they're carting people into the ER. He's like, you can only handle this so much as a trauma surgeon, because you see it over and over and over again. By the way, EMDR was my next question, because I was going to ask Dr. LaRosa if she's trained in it, because that was the one thing about our episode, Todd, that stuck out to me, because I had never heard about EMDR. So like at the back end of our episode, that was the one thing, because I have a psychology background, graduated with a degree in psych. So that was the one thing I had never heard of EMDR, and so that's what stuck out about the episode, is when you talked about EMDR. So Dr. LaRosa, are you trained in EMDR? Oh.
You're on mute.
Vanetta, you're on mute.
There she goes.
Hey, and you guys can leave yourself unmuted.
Okay.
I do all the editing, so we're fine. Whatever snafus we have, we're fine. You can leave yourself on.
Yeah, and Ryan, you said Walking Tall Foundation to start. It's
Wa-
Walking Tall movement.
Walking Tall movement. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. All good.
Cool.
I'm so sorry. My dogs were a little yappy for a moment. So
This won't be the first episode where we've had dogs barking in the background.
Yes. So no, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I am not trained specifically in this technique, although a lot of the cognitive behavior methods that are associated with it, I'm certainly familiar with and have utilized. But it's a super effective treatment, as anyone who has experienced it will let you know, because it helps you organize and process the trauma accordingly. It prevents all those cognitive distortions and anxiety amplifications that come along with such a thing as the trauma. And it really just helps the person put the trauma into a proper perspective so that they themselves can, number one, actualize it, realize it, go through it as it occurred, and then process it with the support of some cognitive techniques that enable the person to calm down, to reduce their anxiety and effectively deal with the aftermath of that trauma.
Because it moves it to the past, correct? Like that's the benefit of it. Because obviously, Todd and Chris, as you go through something like that, you're going to feel like you're still going through that, correct?
Yeah, I think, what I could say about it, having just done a session of it the other day, what I would say to you, Ryan, or anybody listening for that matter, is if I were to say to you, tell me about the worst dream you've ever had, right? And you could pull this nightmare out of memory. You could pretend and envision yourself in that scene and smell those smells and hear those sounds, even though it was simply a dream, right? You could pull that memory from your brain in any capacity. So to me right now, with what EMDR is doing for me personally is it's making my experience seem as if it was a dream. It's always going to be there. It's something that I could always pull from memory, and it's oftentimes going to pop itself into my own brain. But I have control over it to a different degree now, I think, in many ways, particularly the scenes of my experience to be processed through EMDR. But that doesn't mean that the triggers aren't still there and that the trauma is not present. I'm just learning better now to manage it in a more controllable way. Todd, do you feel the same?
Yeah, I think it's different for pretty much anybody in your circumstance, right? And then it's also different on the therapist that's delivering the different types of paddles or audio or visual or vibration that you're using. I think for me, I wouldn't probably classify it as or categorize it as like a dream. It's more putting it, for me, it puts the reality of what happened. I couldn't remember my movie per se, the 8 hours when I was on the ground doing all these things. I couldn't piece it all together. And then I had this throbbing headache in the back of my head that just wouldn't stop. I couldn't sleep. I'm having nightmares right now. The last 5 days since the incident happened in Plano, Texas, I can't sleep. And so what EMDR, which I'm going to be going back to and have some more sessions on this just to have a catch up. But what that's going to allow me to do is learn some techniques. Probably, Chris, is what you're talking about too, to be able to put that in front of you, process it. I'm a guy. I don't cry. I cry in church sometimes. I just let it go. I don't, it's the music that gets me. It's the vulnerability. It's taking off the armor. I need that. That's what I do in EMDR. That allows me to process and break down all my kind of strength that I have on the outside to get into the inside so I can feel what's going on. I can process everything that's happening to me, learn how to deal with that emotionally, and then go out to the real world. And like Chris said, it definitely does not help with the triggers in terms of the first reaction. But what it does is it does allow you to process, okay, what's going on? Where am I? I'm in a safe spot. Okay, and I'm going to relieve myself and bring my heart rate down easier because of the training and what you go through with EMDR. Where if I've been around people that have not gone through EMDR, that have been in tragic situations, and that prolonged effect after a trigger happens could be days, it could be weeks, and it's like never ending. So I think EMDR, that's what it did for me. Chris, is that kind of what you're
stuck in
talking
fight or
about too?
flight, correct? I mean,
I'm still in
Yes.
it.
You're
Yeah,
stuck
I'll
in
tell
fight
you.
or flight, correct?
Yeah, I'll
that
tell
was
you.
actually the topic of one of our shows that we talked about fight or flight. We talked about the variety of memories that exist in the long-term storage facility, because the long-term memory is a storage facility of an unknown capacity. So at any point in time, memories will just pop up, given the face of any trigger that may seem innocent in some way, shape, or form. It could be the way that the wind is blowing, literally, certain sounds in the background, certain smells. We talked a lot about triggers, and we also talked about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic portions of the autonomic nervous system, and how that fight or flight bodily neurophysiology kicks into gear for people and just puts you back into that same panicked or fearful state that you may have been in during your traumatic experience. And what cognitive behavior therapists try to do is help the person really use a variety of coping skills to number one, anticipate those situations, and then if they are experienced, help the person achieve a calming, more baseline state so that they can actually get through that situation. And EMDR is, if you just think of the name, desensitization and reprocessing. The person is being desensitized and able to experience and understand that trauma, and then reprocessing it. And once they can do that, then they can add the techniques to help them cope and calm down and employ all those self-calming strategies.
Well, you look at the long-term effects of cortisol, like when that happens, the cortisol never gets out of your bloodstream. And you look at the long-term effects of cortisol, heart attacks, obesity, I mean, all those things that come with being continually stressed, those
Yes.
have long-term effects where obviously it's going to decrease the length of your lifetime with the amount of cortisol that stays in your bloodstream.
It's a good point. And that's why these techniques are so important in terms of self-calming, self-care, understanding your own antecedents and triggers as much as you possibly can. It's a lifetime of work. Unfortunately, once a trauma or traumatic state has been achieved, it's a lifetime of work.
Dr. LaRosa, is there a time for medication? I mean, you look at Todd, he can't sleep. Is there a time for medication, or is cognitive behavior therapy the best route, or can we blend at times with that? Or again, I know everybody's individual. It's such an individual thing with each person, but is there a time for medication?
You're so right. It's very individual, given people's health histories, personal preferences, level of comfort, absolutely. But certainly there is a time for a conjoined effort. Medication management with good therapy, has fantastic outcomes, and people really need to listen to their doctors and to their mental health professionals, who should also work together to see where, and states change, affective states change, ability sets to deal with certain traumas change. And when it's time to introduce an additional support, I think people should certainly be open to it and hear their healthcare professional suggestions.
Ryan, it's so funny. If I may, real quick, you asked that question. I'm going through that right now. If you didn't hear, earlier in April, we had another incident in Highland Park. The town was shut down for about 2 hours, and it was extremely triggering to me. Sent me into a panic attack. I didn't sleep for 3 straight days. I think I got 5 hours of sleep over 3 days. I was really just in a bad place, and so I went and got a physical a few days after, because I was just in shambles, frankly. And my physician, prescribed me antidepressants, anti-anxiety medicine, and I forget what else, 3 different prescriptions. And again, to your point and doctor's point, there's always a time for medication and consideration of that. But you've known me a long time, and I don't know that I've ever needed antidepressants or ever considered taking them, and certainly didn't have panic attacks or anxiety to the extent I have it now. So what I committed to my doctor is that I was going to fill the prescriptions. So I filled them, but they're still sitting on my nightstand. I haven't gone down that road yet. And I'm working as best as I can right now on some of my behaviors. I'm going back to the gym on a daily basis. I'm going to my therapist more often. I'm taking more walks. I'm doing some of these things. And while admittedly they're helping to some degree, they're not helping me completely yet. And so now, as time progresses, I'm thinking about medication, but I'm not quite there yet either.
And Mal, that's where I was on you the most in the initial talks with you of, are you going to therapy yet? And that's where I was trying to push you to make sure you got into therapy. And I know this, and we'll get to this on the back end, as a male, it's really hard to reach out for help. Like you feel like you have to do everything on your own, and that just comes with being a male, and that's our society is males are just forced to, okay, just go figure it out. You're off on an island.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Not only did folks like yourself or my dad or some other close relatives, but I talk about my brother here on with us, Todd. Like the first text, literally, he sent me, on July 7th was, "Hey, I went to EMDR. You need to see a therapist. Do this, do that. Here's how I succeeded," and I did none of it. Like I was so just locked in on what I needed to do. And I hate to say it, my experience in baseball, being on teams for so long, right, ingrained this in me. It's this we above me mentality. And so at work or in society or in my family, I'm putting everybody before myself and working with traumatized individuals in a traumatized community, being the helper that I am, or that empath. Like I didn't focus on me for 9 months. I literally like shut down, focused on everybody else, took all the attention off me. And then you get put in another lockdown, and then before you know it, I'm having panic attacks. So yeah, it's hard to focus on yourself when you need to. And I think particularly my experience and the experience of anybody in baseball for that matter, having been on teams, would tell you think of others first. You're not selfish. There's no I in team, whatever these cliches are. But when it comes to mental health and it comes to things like this, you have to be selfish. And I'm learning that now.
I listen to Tim Ferriss a lot, and so MAPS is getting a lot of play right now, Dr. LaRosa. I mean, is that the future of treatment? If you look at what MAPS is doing right now, I don't know if you know MAPS, they're out of Johns Hopkins, but is that the future of treatment?
I honestly, this is an emerging conversation, an emerging treatment, and I'm committing myself to learn more about it. I can't speak intelligently on the topic. I'm not an expert, and the best therapies now were once emerging. So, the more research and the more support that come along,
we can blame the government for the 60s and what they did in the 60s because we're about 50 years behind what we should know at this point because of the federal government. We won't get into that part because it's a baseball podcast.
We're apolitical.
But, I am too, but again, sometimes the government gets involved and it really railroads what scientists and doctors are able to do from an experimental standpoint. And I think we're about 50 years behind where we should be right now if they hadn't have rescheduled everything in the 60s.
Ryan, I'll say to that point, we had on our show previously the most amazing man named Chris Brown. Chris Brown is a Marine. He's a Marine veteran. He had 3 tours of duty, was in a firefight, basically naked, barefoot for about an hour and a half, and is extremely traumatized. He's now a therapist with the VA out of Seattle. He's opening his own private practice in the Seattle area, and he's focusing on psychedelics. Now, we don't want to get into that conversation too much, but that's another emerging research that's being done, and that's his focus. And then we think back to what I talk about psychedelics. We think of, drugs and peace, love, and rock and roll. But
and again, I'm not a doctor, and this is all within doctor supervision. But there is a lot of research coming out now, doctor supervised with military individuals, and it's showing positive results of them: PTSD, depression, anxiety, alcoholism. Because, by the way, they all work off the same receptors in the brain. So all of those things it's the same receptors in the brain. So if you can find something that helps one of those things, it's probably going to help all of them because it's the same receptors in your brain.
Yeah. And to your point, that's where Chris is mentioning, there's a lot of, and Doctor could speak about this better, the research is emerging. We're not condoning use of anything at this point.
No, because it's a moral issue more than anything for most people.
Correct. Yeah, Doctor, you could speak to that too.
Aside from speaking of, moral choices and beliefs that people have, I really wanted to go back and just touch upon, what Todd was trying to say earlier and how Todd reached out to you. And really, as we talked about with Ian Hill, I think it was last week or the week before, the stigma that men face in society and the fear that they have about being vulnerable or weak or somehow affected by a mental health issue in a negative way. And Todd, we talked about this, and Ryan, how you also helped Chris. You stood up for your right, as a human being, as a male, to say, I can't do this alone. I'm suffering. I'm struggling. My mental health is at risk, and I need help. And that is okay. And one of the points of Walking Tall is to bring a variety of people on to talk about their experience, their adversity, their trauma, and let people know these wonderful exemplars of society have been there. They've been down and out. They've been crushed. They've been in periods of their life that they didn't think that they could rise from, and here they are. Here's how they walk tall for themselves. Here's how others walk tall for them, and here's how now they are walking tall for others. And I think that, I just want to bring it back to that, because that really is the foundation of what we are trying to share, and it's so critically important. And there are a variety of therapies out there. Cognitive behavior therapy has, a variety of different techniques that are employed successfully for people in all types of circumstances. There's help out there, and it's hard sometimes to find the right therapist who's going to provide the correct treatment or make the right personal connection with someone. But our message is to not give up trying, because there is someone out there that eventually will help. And that's our main perspective. And I just wanted to kind of reinforce that for a few minutes.
Yeah, that's the thing I always hear with people that are on talking about going to therapy. They're like, just because you may not mesh with the first one, like, don't shut it down, because it just means you haven't connected with that person. And for me, it's like finding a yoga instructor. Like, you're not going to mesh with every yoga instructor. So same thing with therapy. Like, you're not going to mesh with every person. So find someone that you feel like fits. So don't shut it down after the first go if it doesn't work for you.
That's so true. And it's hard when you reach out to someone and you're very hopeful that that person can help you in a time that you are in desperate need, and that relationship doesn't work out. That is very difficult for someone to bounce back from and to go out and get the strength to try to find somebody else. We're working on that as well. We have another project behind the scenes. Hopefully someday we'll be a little more advanced with it and be able to share. But it is important that people keep trying and not give up. And, with regard to your conversation about various neurotransmitters, absolutely. We know dopamine and serotonin. We know the implications of a variety of these neurotransmitters on our receptor sites in our brain when we are depressed, when we are anxious. I talked about that in one of our previous shows. And a lot of these different therapies are trying to find other ways to stimulate these brain pathways, if you will.
It's a neuroplasticity thing, correct? It's like they describe it as a repacking of snow, basically, because your neural pathways get hardened over time. It allows the brain to be a little bit neuroplastic, have more neuroplasticity. And so you're able to develop habit changes quicker, because your brain is like going back to being a child again, where you can learn things and redo some habits.
It's a beautiful way to explain it. Yes, in a sense, at that synapse, in between neurons, as they communicate, the dendrites of other neurons, they become altered if there is not the proper dosage of a neurotransmitter that's needed, like serotonin or dopamine. If there isn't enough, or if there's too much, then those dendrites alter to fit that neurophysiologic situation. And some of these treatments may help to change the landscape of those dendrites so that they are more apt to pick up on the correct dosage of neurotransmitter, which is sparked by other medications that are given. So yeah, there's so much in terms of potential for these emerging treatments. I'm excited for what the field has to offer. Again, I am no expert in them as of yet, but anything that is researched appropriately and goes through the correct IRB boards, are what we encourage people to learn about.
And I'm fortunate in my household growing up. I saw my dad cry, saw my mom cry. I freely cried. My wife will make fun of me sometimes because of it, because I'll cry at commercials, I'll cry at songs, I'll cry at movies. Like I guess, in a positive way, I have not been self-conscious about being vulnerable, just because I saw good examples of it growing up, where it's okay to show your emotions. Some of it's, Mal knows my dad very well. Some of it came out as anger, but then you also saw the flip side of that, where you saw empathy as well, and empathy for humans and empathy for yourself and those around you. So I had really good examples growing up in my house.
Yeah, I probably grew up the other way. Obviously growing up in a major league clubhouse too, and being around guys that were always, reaching for that excellence, and the losses that happened, in the quiet times, and the focus and just that grit too. It was always, you never saw really anybody cry. My dad was a really tough guy, very, empathetic at times. I mean, he was a good dad. But very, very tough, no blood, no foul. Like we'd go play basketball. It was physical. You get knocked down, you scrape your knee, you get back up, and it is what it is. And, but and that's the problem with it too, though, is, like me going through the minor league system and you're struggling mentally. Maybe, you don't know if like all of a sudden you got your tail handed to you 2 games in a row, or you're dominating and you're like on, cloud nine and you're fine. But when you're at loss and you're struggling and maybe you're just totally disconnected from where your goals are in that life, and you find yourself in a Motel 6 with Waffle House next door, and you're reading the Bible because you're like, where am I right now as a person? You can't go into your manager's office. I mean, Tom Kochman, and I'm not calling these guys out, because maybe Tom Kochman back in the day would have said, hey, sit down, son, let's talk. Now, I know Tom because he's a dad, he'd be more open to that, but he'd probably tell me, get out of my office with your mental stuff and go take care of yourself. So the stigma is still there, and it's not just in sports, but it's in the corporate side too. And I think the best thing that I've probably heard recently as we've started this Walking Tall movement is more open talk. So we've had some amazing guests come on. Brian Wood, 29-year veteran of law enforcement, hostage negotiator, FBI terrorist task force. He was my best man at my wedding. But I never knew Woody struggled sometimes with some of the calls that he goes on. And he was never vulnerable, or we never talked about that where we're drinking beers in his backyard or barbecuing. But those are the things that sometimes we need to start talking about. And we need to be able to have a manager that we can go into that opens up the door and says, hey, you know what? We're going to have, even if it's 10 minutes, sit down, Ryan. Tell me about what's going on. I don't want to talk about baseball. Tell me how you're doing. Like, how's school going? How's life going? How's your new marriage? How are your kids? Like, what's going on? I'm 60 years old, or I'm 50 years old, or I've got, a lot of experience in the industry. Talk to me. Tell me what you're struggling with. And let's talk about those things. We don't do enough of that. And when we get to that point, I think we'll start seeing, as a country and as a globe, I think we'll start to see our mental health crisis start to diminish a little bit more. And, the other part to that too, and I'll finish with this on my side, is I think you need to find, going back to whether you take drugs or you don't take drugs, whether you, take prescriptions or you don't, I think you have to find that center of balance in your life. Where are you the most happiest, and what gets you there, right? Because the world's not going to change. You're still going to have problems. You're still going to have issues. But if we can get to a point where we're supporting each other and we're just reaching out openly when someone's going through a hard time, and just texting them, hey, what's up, Chris? How you doing today? Are you doing all right? Even though it might be a nuisance, Chris is going to know that I'm there. Don't go do something stupid and hurt yourself or hurt someone else. So I'm really happy. I couldn't be more happy to be with these two individuals. And we're learning a lot from each other. We're learning a lot from the guests we're having on. And it's just amazing how now people are starting to really share stories. I got Fire Chief that shared his story about one of the most vulnerable calls, horrific calls that he went on. We're just having a drink. I just met this man, and he's literally telling me these things because of we're having an open conversation, and he knows I can handle it. I've been through some of that stuff that he's gone through, and that's all it takes too. Just introduce the opportunity for a conversation.
And that's why, again, that's why majority of Major League Baseball organizations have a peak performance coach to be that buffer, to give the players someone to talk to. We have a long way to go, but I think they have at least figured out, not every player can go talk to their manager about it. So they need someone else that they can go to get this off of their chest, to allow them to get those things out. So I think they've done a much better job at the pro level of adding facility and facilitators in those areas to help the players out that are struggling.
Yeah, I would say, to that, Ryan, real quick, in my experience with peak performance coaching, it's different than the type of therapy I need or that Todd went through or that maybe some other players need. And so I want to just really delineate, right? Like I've sat with some of the best peak performance coaches, I mean, I got to spend 3 days in Brian Cain's basement, right? I think the world of the man, but I wouldn't classify him as a therapist and I wouldn't go to him after a mass shooting, right? Like, so I want to make sure that,
Yes.
whether it's the three of us, the four of us, a listener understands there's a certain difference between the therapy one may need and peak performance. Because in some ways, I'll say, the peak performance mentality actually hurt me, right? It hurt me throughout my 9 months of ignoring myself because I'm thinking this we before me. I'm thinking this, I could fake it till I make it. I could visualize myself being happy. I could do all these things that we coach players to do to be successful on the field. Well, let's face it, in everyday life, after going through a mass shooting or having PTSD like I do, it's not good enough. I needed like real therapy, like real therapy,
Well, even introducing peer support groups too.
Correct.
Inside a team, for example, you got a lot of young athletes that aren't afraid to be vulnerable in today's game or today's society. Young people, not just athletes. And then you have athletes or people, younger people that are very withdrawn. It's the introvert versus extrovert, right? But if we can get some of those extroverts to be more vulnerable with themselves and start creating more peer support groups within the team, then maybe you don't have to go to the manager. But I question the manager too. Listen, you go through things, and hopefully there's one listening right now. Like you've gone through stuff. You're hard. You're a great coach. You're a great manager. But man, open up, soften up a little bit because you are going to get so much juice, more squeezed out of that lemon, out of that athlete, if you are just more vulnerable and more approachable. I get it. Like you need athletes to be hard. We've got to have that moment of violence when it happens, that 2 to 3 seconds of blast and momentum, and you want that rally. You're going to get that because that's embedded and ingrained into those athletes. But soften up a little bit and try to get into that inner soul because you're going to talk about a team. And I've been a part of 2 World Series championships with my dad, one with the Angels. You look at every clubhouse on how they bond together. Man, all those guys will share stories about everything. What's at home, how they're feeling, all these things. It's the teams that lose. There's no communication. There's no open dialogue. So sorry,
Dr. LaRosa,
Chris,
I have a question for you. Do you want to expand on that, Dr. LaRosa? Go ahead, and then I've got a follow-up question for that.
Sure, just for a quick second. I love those perspectives, Todd and Chris, because as I have, my son is 16 years old and he has a stress fracture in his foot right now, and he came off of a record-breaking track season, and he's just been dying to get back into baseball. And he's like a caged greyhound. If you were to look at a very sad greyhound in a cage, that's what my son looks like every single day. His mental health is suffering tremendously because of these injuries. And thank God.
Tell him to listen to Monday's podcast because Tyson Blazer and I talked about being injured. He was injured pretty much for 5 years of college. So we talked about how to handle injury as a player.
I am definitely going to give that to him for certain. He is. And we talked also about how people with these sorts of physical gifts have this special intelligence. I'm sure you've heard Howard Gardner's 12 different types of intelligences, and bodily kinesthetic intelligence is a fantastic intelligence, and it makes the brain and the body feel so good. So what he has done to alleviate his condition, and there's some fantastic research that shows weight training specifically improves symptoms of depression almost as well as certain medications, if not better in some circumstances. He has learned the speed bag in a matter of 4 days. He has been hitting and learning how to utilize his boot to help his boot. He's in a walker boot to help with his timing. He's practicing curveball, hitting curveballs. He's throwing. He's increasing his throwing mechanics without a crow hop or pro skip, as they call it now. He's doing all sorts of things because he cannot exist without physical activity at a super high level. He was born an elite athlete. He's been this way his whole entire life. And he doesn't know what to do with himself if not for having those opportunities in his life. So he's creating them. But what he is also doing is he is neglecting the psychological part of what he's going through. His grades were suffering last quarter, and I had to, help him out with that sort of thing. And he said to me, I cannot focus on anything except for my injury. I don't care about anything else. I can't stop thinking about all the things that I can't do. and it is creating anxiety and depression in an otherwise healthy individual. We talked a lot about predispositions for a variety of mental illness. You don't know what you're predisposed to develop until you come into face with something that challenges you emotionally to the extent that you feel anxiety or depression for the very first time. And then you'll know what you're predisposed, because you'll express it to some degree or not. And that's also cumulative in terms of the brain. So, when they say life is hard, it certainly is. And, with each experience that someone goes through, they might get closer to their ultimate expression of anxiety or depression or something that they have in their genes. And, at a certain point, it just builds up, and, and now they're experiencing it. Now it's expressed. So what we're trying to do is get to that earlier and say, you have a predisposition. I have levels of depression that I personally have had to go through and work through. He has a predisposition genetically to some degree for these things. And so he doesn't know this right now. He doesn't understand what depression is or what he's feeling, but I see in his behaviors that there is the beginnings of these depressive states. So yeah, more training for anyone in a coaching position, because it's such a vital role. I mean, my son has had wonderful relationships with so many coaches that he's been blessed to have in his life. It's such an important role, and it's so impactful. And this would be such great training for coaches to, to include and to embody and, facilitate these support peer groups and, be there for the players, because they want you, they want to hear from you. My son respects and regards his coaches very, very highly. It's an important role.
We talk about fail forward moments all the time on the podcast, and that was Tyson's. Actually, was getting injured in college, because he said he finally figured out how to separate his identity as a baseball player from his identity as an actual person. And I think that's what happens to kids that have gotten hurt for the first time. They've put their whole identity into being an athlete. They don't know how to separate that out to where I'm actually a human being that just happens to play a sport, rather than putting all your eggs in one basket as this is my whole identity as being an athlete. And the universe works that way sometimes. Sometimes the universe has to give you a little bit of a check sometimes to step back, figure out your priorities and what's actually important. And then once you get back, I think you're much better off, because you figure out, okay, it's been taken away from me. I've worked through it. Now I know how to go forward as a baseball player or an athlete, but also be a human being as well.
Oh, it's such a hard lesson.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Ryan. Who would have thought, right? Like, in a way, right? Both Todd and my experiences of being in a mass shooting, in a way, could be a blessing. And not that either he or I failed in our days, in those experiences, and not that we're failing now, but therapy and rediscovering yourself is failing forward often. And some of our experiences that we've still encountered through therapy and things like that feel like failures, but they're successes. And I often think back now, to that point of identity, and, obviously having coached for about 9 years and played, and having, been involved at the game at the Division I level for about 13 or 14 straight. When I stopped coaching, like, my identity, even though it was my decision, was lost, right? I was searching for myself and things of that sort. And even though I'm in Parks and Rec now, and I love the career and I love the industry, like, I've always had this yearning for baseball and, a desire to get back in the game.
Sorry about the White Sox, by the way.
Yeah, they're terrible, man. Holy cats. But nevertheless, now I think, like, man, with my experience of having been in the shooting, and now what I've learned and how I've matured over the years, like, how much better of a coach I would be now, and that experience of being in the parade and Todd's of being en route, like, have, I think, made us better people, but have also provided us a focus that I don't know that I would ever really had much of a affection for mental health to the degree I have. And certainly, if not for our experiences, the Walking Tall movement wouldn't have been established, and we wouldn't be helping the people of which we think we're already helping, and they're telling us. So sometimes you got to experience the shit to get to the good stuff, right? And that's kind of where we're at. But now, hopefully, we're providing more good than bad.
And to Todd's point about players struggling, I'm reading Ryan Holiday's Discipline is Destiny right now. He has a really good chapter on Lou Gehrig. Lou Gehrig was going to quit in the minor leagues. He didn't think he was good enough. So pretty good. I think Lou Gehrig was a decent player, wasn't he?
He turned out
He was
all right.
okay.
Yeah,
And luckily, he had a manager, the GM of the Yankees at the time, set one of their scouts down in the minor leagues and had him reframe like Luke Gehrig, because he's competitive and he's the Iron Horse for a reason, thought he should get a hit every time. So they sent an old-time scout down to the minor leagues to talk to him to actually have him get a better perspective and reframe what actually a batting average is. And when you get hit 300, good. 350 is great. No one hits 400. So, like, they had to reframe Lou Gehrig. He was going to quit. He's going to quit.
Oh.
Well, you talk about, the mental side of the game, right? And there's been, look at the Ken Revisas, the late Ken Revisa, and it's been some amazing people in sports and on our great, sport of baseball that have dedicated their lives to educating batters and pitchers to zone in that 3 seconds of time that you need to be focused in order to be impactful, right? But you can't do any of that if the other 97% of the time you're depressed. You got stuff on your mind, like Chris was bringing up earlier, or Dr. LaRosa was bringing up, and just the whole storage capacity of this warehouse of crap that you have. If you can't deal with that individually, how are you supposed to focus on pitch by pitch? It's almost impossible.
I've
and
said
that's what
it
Chris,
in the last 4 years. I've said it a million times for coaches. You have to offer these resources because if you can get your players on top of it, they will perform better. They will perform better. I guarantee
100%.
they will perform better.
It's so funny you said that too. We just had KT on, Kyle Thousand, and former Iowa baseball player, teammate of mine, but is now just doing some amazing things still in the game as a prominent baseball agent. He's now with Milk and Honey, was with Jay-Z and Rock Nation, and was like CC Sabathia and Robinson Cano's agent, and he's negotiating like billion-dollar contracts or whatever. But we had a really great conversation and how, even at his agency, Milk and Honey, how they're now starting to implement therapy and some sort of resources for their athletes as well as their musicians, because they're starting to recognize that, high performing individuals. I talk a lot about my affection for music. I think we'll get to that maybe, Ryan, I hope. But I read an article the other day about how, Hall of Fame caliber musicians have a higher incidence of depression. The creativity turns into depression and things of that sort. And even now, like on social media, and I'm experiencing it myself with Walking Tall, right? There's a lot of pressure to be prevalent and relevant and consistent. And when I'm not doing that on social media now, I even feel like a little bit of anxiety, like, oh my God, I got to get a post out. Oh, I got to get Walking Tall's word out. And I could only imagine now in society with social media and this prevalence of likes and loves and clicks and all these things, like how our youth are really going to become more depressed and more anxious and more exacerbated the issues of mental health because of social media and things like that. But
hey,
it's great to see
I like Rick
organizations
Rubin's podcast, the Broken Record podcast, because he interviews musicians, and so you see like the creative people, they have so many self-doubts. That's why Andre 3000 of Outkast hasn't put any music out. He doesn't think he's any good anymore. Yeah, and that's one of the greatest. Outkast, one of the greatest bands of all time, rap bands of all the time. He will not put music out because he doesn't think he's putting good stuff out there. And then Rick Rubin's like, hey, just throw it out in the universe. Don't worry about what anybody's going to think about it. Just throw it out in the universe. Create as much as you possibly can. Throw it out in the universe and let the audience decide if they like it or not. And if they don't like it, don't worry about it.
That's what we're doing on Walking Tall. That's our podcast.
Just throw it out there. Just create as much as you can. Just keep creating. Like whether you think it's good or not. And I like South Park too. I don't get to watch it very much, but I can't remember if it was Matt or Trey. It was the World of Warcraft episode. I don't know if you remember that South Park episode. It was the World of Warcraft episode. He literally, it was like starting their season. I don't know what season it was. They've done a million of them. He did not want to put that episode out. He thought it was the worst thing they'd ever done. He was like, we're finished. We are so bad. We're awful. It's their highest watched episode of all time. And he thought it was awful. Mm-hmm. And again, you don't know what society is going to like or dislike. So you just can't worry about that piece. Go ahead.
So funny.
Dr. LaRosa,
there's a guy in Highland Park. There's a
Dr. LaRosa, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Doctor.
No, I was just going to say there's so many pros and cons of social media, but think of how it affects our kids. They have to deal with all the things that you just summarized, and their brains are not at all equipped to do so. And that's where some of this anxiety and depression starting younger it's getting solidified earlier and it's harder to treat later on. And so we definitely, that's definitely worth a conversation at some point in a separate time.
Should we ban it to 25?
You
Should we
know.
ban social media to 25? I mean, really, that's when the
Too much
neural
money
pathways
involved.
are.
More tools, give them more.
I'd
If you
say we
think
ban
about,
it to 25. Give them a
ban it
head
till
start.
33 when
Also,
the front
marriage.
lobe is finally
Marriage should
developed.
be banned till 25. Also.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that.
You have
Speaking
no
from my own
idea.
side, I don't mind.
The Psychology of Money is another really good book too. I'm rereading it. I've read it multiple times, but it talks about that. Like, you have people making life decisions at 18, and you are not going to be that person at 28 or 30 or 35 or 40. You're going to completely change. So you're making huge life decisions, expecting that what I view at it as an 18-year-old is going to be my same view as a 40-year-old. And if you have the same views at 40 that you did at 18, there's something wrong with you.
Well, I'd say right to that
Yeah.
point, obviously having, not recruited for quite some time, the recruiting landscape in the game has changed significantly. We had built some, what I thought were some well-built classes at Iowa during our time, some nationally ranked recruiting classes and things like that. But it just boggles my mind now to see 14 and 13-year-olds committing to some of these Power 5 schools.
The new rules are going to change that, though.
I hope.
The new rules.
I hope.
Dr. LaRosa, you're just getting into it, but the new rules that have already retracted and been put in place, it was retroactive on April 26th. So you can't contact anyone until August 1st going into their senior year, junior year.
Junior year,
Junior
right?
year.
Yeah,
Junior year.
Yeah.
That's going to hopefully bring it back a little bit. I always talk about my experience. I was just lucky. I got to take 5 official visits. We have not seen that for 15 years. Mm-hmm. We haven't seen it for 15 years.
And there's 13-year-olds making commitments, and I got to believe the new
and the
rule
good thing
changes
is
will
those
help.
schools can't have contact with them now. Like even if a 14-year-old's committed, they're not supposed to have any contact with them until they're able. We'll see if that happens.
You just said it. Not supposed to.
Not supposed to. I mean, again.
But then think about what happens to their psyche when they don't end up playing at those schools, when they don't develop to the degree that they're projected to.
Yes.
It's very, very sad for them. And I'm very glad that the rules are being changed. For my son, who was kind of a little more of a late bloomer, he's 16, but he's a junior now. He should be a sophomore. But he's young for his grade. His metrics are all there. He's all there. He works his tail off. He performs. But the transfer portal is a difficult thing to fight through. And he's going to be 17 when he enters into college. And trying to sell that to a coach who has 23 and 24-year-olds with experience playing, that's going to be very, very difficult.
I would have been all about it. I loved our young guys.
Yep.
I knew it might take them a little bit, but Drew Galassi played for me at Western Hill, showed up as a 17-year-old. Now he had a lot of maturing to do when he got there, but that kid when he was a junior was as good as anybody in the country from a left-handed hitter who could run, was a late developer, big wiry kid, flew but could run. Yeah. But again, so tell him to be patient as a parent. I'm not talking to you as a doctor now. I'm talking to you as a parent. Be patient with the process. The longer you can allow him to develop, the closer he's going to be able to get to the right fit. But go back to academic and social. Make sure he checks off those 2 boxes first. Does he like it academically? Does he like it socially? Then figure the baseball part out, because if he can check those 2 boxes off academically and socially, it gives him a chance, because every kid in college struggles. Regular students struggle. If he hasn't checked those 2 boxes off, he's going to be miserable, and he'll end up hitting the transfer portal, which is why we see a lot of kids in the transfer portal, because they haven't checked off the academic or social piece on where they're going to school.
What a tough landscape for these young developing minds. He said to me the other day, I definitely want to study kinesiology. So you know what? We're getting there.
I thought I was going to be a brain surgeon, so tell him it's going to change.
You still think you are.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Actually, Dr. LaRosa, I do want to backtrack a little bit. With trauma, I think that word gets thrown around so much now. Trauma, I think what people think actually is trauma. Obviously, Chris and Todd, that is actual trauma. And, to Todd's point, a lot of that gets buried. So we go through traumatic events. A lot of it's childhood traumatic events. A lot of that gets erased from our memory. How does somebody know, okay, do I actually have trauma, or is it just general anxiety, a little bit of depression? How do you differentiate, or can you even differentiate between those things?
Well, there is a subjective experience, obviously, when somebody indicates that they have been through something traumatic. What's traumatic for me may not be for someone else, vice versa. But in general, a traumatic experience leaves this state of dissociation, this state of behavioral change, this state of marked anxiety, depression, and a whole bunch of other mental health symptoms that were not present prior to the situation that they're associating or connecting with the trauma. And that really is that acute sort of, symptomology after a specific situation that would qualify it as a trauma. Now, could something be regurgitated from 20 years past if they experience something and then psychologically dissociated from it? Certainly. And that's why there are people that come up and talk about different things that they experienced during childhood or, during their teenage years, and they're bringing it up at 40 or 50 years old because they have had struggles in their life, and only through targeted therapy and some work were they able to dig back and dig deep enough into those experiences to understand the connection those experiences had to their lifelong patterns of challenging behavior. So it could happen in either one of those routes.
I mean, how much of the mass shootings can be linked back to the shooter of childhood trauma? I mean, how much of that can be traced back to childhood trauma? I mean, I look at Columbine. Columbine was the first one that I, remember, but it seemed like those kids were bullied repeatedly by their classmates growing up. And that was the impetus of all of that for them, is they were bullied repeatedly by their classmates growing up.
This is so sad. And, this is a topic that just weighs so heavily on my heart. What children experience and what people go through, when somebody reaches the point of suicide, attempted suicide, thoughts of suicide, there's nothing more tragic in my mind and in my heart than someone feeling so desperate. I've had personal experiences with this. A lifelong friend of mine, took her own life a bunch of years ago. And just to think about the pain that person must have been experiencing is just absolutely overwhelming. When people cross the line and they go and target and hurt other people, that's a different conversation. And I can't say for sure that these things come from trauma. They could come from variety of brain injuries, mental health problems, psychotic states, sociopathic states, drug use. There are so many different variables that could lead into a person acting in such a way. And I know that it's been our point not to focus on these criminals, to the extent that we
with some of the mental health issues, I don't like the term criminal. People need help. And Luke Town was on the podcast with me about 2 or 3 weeks ago. He runs the Advanced Baseball Academy out of Kansas. Mm-hmm. They implement bully and suicide prevention training with every one of their athletes. They have over 400 athletes, and they start at the 8U level. As soon as they get an 8-year-old in there, they start this training. They've intervened in 73 suicides with their kids.
That's amazing.
They've intervened 70. They've stopped 73 suicides.
That's amazing.
Thank God for that. And I say criminal behavior only in the state where
because someone's getting
sociopath, where someone is fully cognizant of
they're criminals.
Then they are a criminal.
Yes.
If there's someone who's in an altered state of mind who has absolutely no idea, and I've worked with people like this, they're in a psychotic state and they have absolutely no idea that what they're doing is actually what they're doing. That's a completely different situation. And for all of it, and I couldn't imagine the various reasons behind, 190 mass shootings that we've had already in this calendar year. The reasons are probably so incredibly varied and distinct.
We won't get into gun control in this episode either.
Yeah, because
nor will we.
Political, and I'm sure we all have
political.
Views. Yeah,
my college advisor, Dr. Lakey, had experimental psychology class. It was my favorite classes, but he was my advisor. He was in the 1966 University of Texas tower shooting. So he was in it. So like that was the first time I had ever heard of any sort of mass shooting. Was we'd sit in his office and he would actually go through the events of that day of being on UT's campus with the tower shooter. And what they found with the shooter is he actually had a tumor on his pituitary gland, which caused him to act that way, but also had childhood trauma. His dad was a militant, said, he had gotten beaten by his father just about every day growing up, which exacerbated the issue. But they said a lot of it was probably the tumor that he had on his pituitary gland.
That's why I alluded to some hidden TBI in there for some people.
My wife teaches 8th grade. We don't talk much about the podcast. Mal knows her. She doesn't care about baseball, which is why our relationship has worked for as long as it has. She could care less about baseball, but she is an 8th grade teacher. And she texted me this morning. She said that's her student's biggest fear is getting shot in school.
Yeah.
And so she wanted to know, despite the evidence for these kids, how can we help them still be good citizens? And she put in there, one of these kids might be the president someday. So how can we help kids develop help them develop a perspective on this to still be good citizens? I think you see this generation of kids, they feel hopeless and helpless going to school because they don't feel like anyone's helping them.
Yeah, Todd, you said that, Todd.
Todd really go on this because I know Todd has a lot of very valuable stuff to say. I have a grader who talks a lot about what he would do and how he would get out if there were a mass shooting, and he's also prone to anxiety. So this is something that he carries with him every single day. And the one thing I'll say is what we're doing now for people in general, being there to listen, being there to support, being more empathetic towards one another, less judgmental, getting rid of the bullying and supporting one another. I think that these are messages that need to carry down to our youngsters, and it needs to start earlier, much earlier at the preschool level. Todd?
Yeah, no, I think number one, it starts with our oversight. I think it starts with our states. It starts with our law enforcement, our fire, our active shooter protocols, what we're doing as a society. It's not individualized. We have to unify on this measure. We have to understand that our kids are going to school scared. My daughter is going to school scared now. We had a threat to our secondary schools here 2 days after what had happened in Plano, Texas, and nobody went to school. So everybody is scared. And how do you walk into a building and not think about, hey, I just want homeschool. I don't even want to go to school anymore, which now we're really screwed up because there goes our whole social environment with our youth. But we need to be more unified. We have to have better protocols. We have to have a better understanding from a civilian standpoint on what civilians go through, not a trained officer, not a trained firefighter, not a trained EMT, that they're working their tails off to try to understand what that protocol is to eliminate the shooter, to come in mass casualty, export those individuals that were shot. But what does the mind really feel like when they're walking through those doors? Is there safety? Am I secure? Is my teacher going to be okay? How are we going to be safe if we continue to open up the back doors to our quote unquote, fortified schools when kids are letting kids in and out, or we got Uber drivers coming into schools? None of that can happen anymore. And that's the only way when we feel like we are truly safe, that these kids are going to feel like, okay, mom and dad are dropping us off. We're going to school. I'm going to be secure in this location. I'm fine. My teachers are okay. More open communication and more love. There has to be more love put down into our school system, regardless of whatever age level that is. And these kids have to know that if they're having a mental breakdown, then they need to be able to have somebody to go to. The other part that really drives me crazy is there's this fine line of today's youth of the social media and the phone attachment, right? Teachers are afraid they can't teach a class without the students being on their phone. So now we're going to take the phones and we're going to put them in a box. And we're going to lock all their phones up, and kids aren't even going to allowed to be able to go to the bathroom without their phones in their hands. That phone, because of what we've done as a society, is their lifeline. That's their attachment. You can't take that phone away now. They need their digital connection. and God forbid they're feeling something or there is an active shooter in place, you're going to have 30 kids scramble into a box to break it to grab their phone. That's seconds in time, and I've seen it live on how a second of time can save a life. And I think those are just protocols that we need to work through as a society. And I've had my own conversations with North Texas fire chiefs and law enforcement, and we all mean really well, but there's no unification. There's no unified strategy within even our own district on how we're going to do things. Principals are making up their mind, the decisions on what their school is. That can't be. So we need more education on a national level. There needs to be committees around this that are formed, that go in, task force, that really work with and educate our teachers to our government, local government, law enforcement, and get everybody on the same page, because this is a real threat. This is a real reality that parents are having conversations with their kids to try to push them off to school. And God forbid something happens. Now you got parents that are like, I had my trust in you. And we can't control every outburst. You can't control every maniac that when something like that happens. But we need to be more unified. So,
well, when you look at the surveys of grade school kids and even high school kids, the two things they want to feel safe and they want to feel seen. And as a society, we're not doing anything right now to help them feel safe. And then you look at some of the legislation that's going in right now, they definitely don't feel seen. And,
that's right.
And so again, we need to try to figure out a way to help our kids growing up to feel safe, but also feel seen.
Yeah. And that's where I think we come in, to a degree in what we aspire to do, not only on our podcast, Ryan, it's just one component of our movement. We have, as Dr. LaRosa alluded to, plans.
Hey, who pulled the trigger on this? I know you three got connected. I know that you didn't come out of the chute saying, "Hey, we're going to start this thing." Who pulled the trigger on we're going to start the Walking Tall movement?
I think they're pointing at me.
Chris.
Well, yeah, you're the go. Chris gets good ideas, and then he's a go-getter. He's a hustler. Chris has always been a hustler. That's why I love him, because Chris has always been a hustler, and once he gets something in his mind, he's going to do it.
Yeah, I appreciate.
I was just thrown into the universe.
Yeah, I love the universe. The universe does. The universe does exactly what it's supposed to do. It may not seem like it at the time, but the universe. You look back in 12 months from now, the universe is going to show you that it happened exactly how it's supposed to happen.
It's so funny you say that, because I was texting that day in January. There's two text message I say that'll be ever change, life changing. July 7th when Todd texts me, and then January 16th when I text Todd to say, hey, I got this idea. And our initial idea, and it's still in the works to a degree, is our initial idea before I knew Dr. LaRosa even was a person, was that for Todd and I, we're going to build a story, and we were going to build a presentation, and we were going to go speak to baseball teams about the importance of peer support, about the importance of not bullying, about the importance of being a good person, about the importance of, having some selflessness in your DNA, but also safety and all those other things. And so we just got to talking, and then he informed me that, he had met Dr. LaRosa through the Scout Hub. And I said, well, what about a podcast? And we had started with a podcast. And it really was just to make, listeners in the world aware of who we are and what we're aspiring to do. But as Dr. LaRosa said, we're working on some technology, and we're also building a charity that we plan in short order, as we get through all of our initiatives to help provide support globally and certainly nationally here, because let's face it, whether it's mass shootings or any other sorts of trauma, communities are
45,000 suicides in 2020, by the way. That's in my talk that I give to coaches. There's 45,000 suicides in 2020, and 75% of that 45,000 are white males 14 to 25 and 40 to 55.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's a huge number of suicides in the white male population, because again, what we talked about is I don't think males feel like they're seen. They don't feel like they can get vulnerable. So I feel like they feel like that's their way out, is just to end it, because they don't feel seen. They don't feel like they can be vulnerable. But yeah, that number, when I went and spoke at the high school coaches conventions, I was like, you know what? I'm going to look up the number, and it was 2020. There was 45,000 suicides.
Yeah. Well, that's what we always say too. I think one of our taglines is vulnerability is strength. And that's really what we're trying to instill upon
Brown.
anybody that values us, is just being vulnerable. I cry a lot. I think another great thing about our team is we're very complimentary of each other. Todd's every bit of 6'5" and 220, and I'm 5'9", $180, and I cry, and Todd's strong and tough and doesn't, and Dr. LaRosa's the brains, right? So we
cry more than both of you.
we just have such a good thing.
I cry.
There's nothing better than a good cry. I'm from a catharsis standpoint, from a cathartic standpoint, there is nothing better than a good cry. You feel much better because it's going to come out. The emotion is going to come out somehow. And if you hold on to that emotion and hold on to it, then it comes out as violence.
The shower
or self-harm
areas.
I think it's just the peace that you need to be able to find within yourself. And like growing up in sports, we all know that you can't just go out in the first day after taking 3 months off of throwing or whatever that is. Well, you don't do it anymore, but how you used to, and be able to throw a bullpen. Like, it takes time, right? Yep. And so if we're having an issue in our life, it's going to take some time to get through this. We're not going to be able to just snap our fingers and go. But if we have a resource, if we know we can talk to somebody maybe that has gone through that, and understanding too, one of my biggest pieces that I've realized over the last 6 years is there are so many tough ass people in this world that have done some crazy things that we would never imagine on the military side and law enforcement, keeping our country safe. I've had an opportunity to speak to some of these people, and they're sharing their most vulnerable pieces with me. And it's amazing to see that they're human. And I think when we realize that all of a sudden, like, we're not the only ones that have gone through maybe what we've gone through. We certainly are reacting to it because of our own body chemistry and what we've experienced in our past. But we're not alone. You're not alone. If you're struggling right now and you've got the weight of the world, man, there is someone that you can call and just talk to. We are built to help each other out. And because the last thing you want in your life is, in that moment of dire need, to even be thinking about ending your own life, but then to maybe be holding someone else's that just passes in your arms. That's horrible. It's a horrible thing. So we want to make sure that we're trying to spread as much awareness and openness and honesty and vulnerability and empathy as we can. Because the toughest people in this world, man, they're all empathetic.
I just assume everyone has baggage. It's just other people. Some people are just really better at hiding it. I just assume every human being out there has baggage. We've all dealt with something. Everybody has baggage. There's just some people that are better at hiding it than others.
Of course we do. And, in talking about how we should be there to lend an empathetic ear, to reach out our hand, just to take 5 minutes to be there for someone else. If you question that person is struggling, it goes so far. Now, my whole life, I've been just surrounded by people talking to me. I was in my 20s. I used to work in Manhattan. I took the train every single day. And within a couple of months, I was surrounded by 3 middle-aged white men who were telling me their life stories and circumstances and problems and issues. And it just grew. And we really had a therapeutic situation on the train to Manhattan every single morning. It was like a 6:30 a.m. train. It was absolutely horrible for someone who was 22 to have to get up that early for work. But, I was there every single day, and I made those connections with people. And I realized something about myself really early on. And that is, I can get people to open up. I get my teenage sons opening up and telling me their life problems. I will not stop until somebody opens up to me and tells me everything that they're feeling. And I know that this was just something I've always had. Maybe some people aren't as skilled at it, and you don't have to be. Just the fact that someone else is there and cares enough to ask how you're doing and hears and wants to hear your situation, it means everything. Ever since I met Todd and Chris, I have had more of my heart opening up to these 2 wonderful men that ask me, how are you? How are you feeling? How is your son doing? What's going on? And that makes me feel so good. From a professional that's used to doing this for other people, I have people doing it for me. Of course, I have my own family and my husband, who do these kinds of things. But it's just so nice to see in the world that there are people built like that are going to take the time to care about you. And it can go so far. I can't stress that enough, how people need to put themselves out on a limb and just do that for other people. It goes so far.
Chris and Todd, besides EMDR, and again, I don't know if you ever get back to where you were before the event. I don't know if that's an actual thing, but when things are kind of getting close to maybe where it was, what besides EMDR, what else are you guys doing to kind of help?
Todd, I'll let you take that because, me having only been about 10 months in, Ryan, I'm probably not the best qualified person to speak about that. But I'm trying, I'm trying to be the person you knew.
And you have to
July
give yourself
3rd.
some grace. And
Yeah.
I don't care about the person I knew before. Like I care
I
about
know.
the person
No,
that
that's
you
not
are
the
now.
point.
Like I care
Yeah,
about the
no,
person
the
you
point
are
is
now.
like, I think what I would say, and Todd being more experienced is, I don't know that I'll ever be back to normal, right? I think your whole perspective.
And by the way, what's normal? None of us are
Yeah,
normal.
no, I mean back to my normal, right? Like
None of us are normal.
yeah, I mean I think like, my whole perception of the world has changed, my whole perception of safety, my whole perception of what is good in the world, all these types of things, and obviously from a PTSD perspective, I'm still working through those triggers and emotions and anxiety and depression and anger and the list goes on. But Todd has been just a great model for me, not to say that he's perfect. And I think he would say the same. He struggles himself too. And, as much as we love walking tall and as much as we love spreading our word and our movement, I think to me, some of the more therapeutic and beneficial time spent with Dr. LaRosa and Todd are the times we're not putting a show on or we're not, interviewing somebody or we're not trying to put forth something. We're just connecting and talking and catching up. We meet every Wednesday and it's like some of my favorite conversations in the morning, like, hey, how are you? But Todd, I know I spoke a little bit too much there. You're succeeding in my mind and you're a great role model for me. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, first of all, to be able to see Ryan, talk about your buddy Mal's here, like to see him go from mush to pure strength and motivation. And I mean, he's infectious, with just his positivity in life now. I think that, it's just been a lot of fun to watch him grow. But for me, going through EMDR really helped me a lot. I tried to eat it myself, coming out of there, being strong, being tough, 6 months, 9 months, a year. I went through a couple of different therapy sessions with different people. I couldn't tell that person what I had seen. I finally found my rock after the third time, and EMDR really helped me. But my day-to-day, I'm a big faith believer. I find myself outside, especially when maybe things are getting a little tough for me. I'll take a step outside, enjoy the clouds, enjoy the rain, whatever it is, and I'll just pray for just a minute, just to be able to pray for more love in our world. And it just calms me down. I love going to church. I feel like that's the one place only that I can take my armor off. But talking about armor, I'm a safety expert now. Honestly, there's not a place that I go into that I'm not checking waistbands. I don't instantly identify my exit points. I'm an expert when it comes to knowing every different type of scenario. If there were an active shooter, if there was some sort of mass tragedy that happened in my own environment, wherever I'm at, of where I'm going, who I'm taking with me, where's my coverage, where's the local nearest officer, where's the nearest hospital, how am I going to get people to safety, and how am I going to eliminate a threat instantly. And so I constantly go through that. Usually it'll take me 5 or 10 minutes to get settled. If I go to ABCA, that's tough, man, because I love ABCA. I love going in there. But, I went there this past year in Nashville. It took me a good hour and a half to figure out where I'm at. My back needs to be up against the wall now. Sometimes somebody will be having a conversation with me. In fact, if you see us in January, I might be looking like I'm concentrated on you, but my mind is in other places. So that's how it affects you. And I get frustrated at it, but I try to bring my level of balance back. I'll separate for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. If my words start going, kind of mixing up, if I can't concentrate, if I get that headache, I know through my therapy, through time and experience, I need a separation. I need some quiet time. I need to be able to relax your blood flow, and then step back into your environment and go have a good time. And, it's just trusting that love wins. It's like my daughter asked after the mass shooting in Vegas. She said, Daddy, how am I supposed to trust people, right? That all people aren't bad. I said, baby girl, there's so many more good people in this world. And to this point, and what you mentioned, Ryan, earlier, we just need to spread more awareness of that, right? So that's how I get through my days.
My quiet time is non-negotiable. That's the best thing I do for myself is transcendental meditation. First thing I do when I wake up, and then I go outside and I walk. And it's usually 5 a.m. I usually see the moon and the sun. The sun is starting to come up, but that's the best thing that I do for myself is the quiet time that I have in the mornings.
Yeah, you need that.
Dr. LaRosa, do you have any sort of morning routine? I know you have kids, so like you're white knuckling it right now. So do you have anything that helps?
Thank God there was a pause there because I teared up yet again when Todd was talking about his daughter. Yeah. Oh my goodness. No, for me, absolutely, positively, a goal on my list is to create a better routine for myself because, I do carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, and, hearing my son say, I'm nobody without my athletics, and to see my other son struggle with his anxiety and some of the kids who tried to bully him in school this year, I end up not only for everything I feel for my clients at work and for the staff that I oversee and everything that goes on, my children, my family, it becomes so much. I have withdrawn from every hobby or activity that I have ever engaged in. I used to be involved in MMA. I used to be involved in, a variety of things. And I have not done any of it in far, far, far too long. So the commitment that I am currently making to myself is to re-engage in some of those healthy behaviors, because all too quickly we can all go down that wrong path of anxiety and depression. I've talked about this before, understanding your precursors, understanding those internal antecedents that you experience, that that depression or that anxiety is creeping back up on you again, and how to pick the right therapy to get yourself back on track. And you asked that question, and in one of our other podcasts, we talked about systematic desensitization and stress inoculation training and all the kinds of things that people can do to control those triggers and those things in their life. And I know that I am not immune to these pains and these types of suffering. Just the other day, I was at a track meet with my son. It was a senior day. Although he can't run, we went there to support his friends. And the gun that kept going off to start the races really freaked me out. And immediately I thought of Chris and Todd, immediately. And then the official came over and he was actually carrying the track gun, which is not a real gun, obviously, but I've never seen a gun. So I looked at it and I was absolutely terrified. I was thinking to myself, get that thing away from the kids. And, it can't shoot anybody. It's a blank for the track. But nevertheless, I realized that I've also been traumatized by, just as our kids are, seeing on the news all of these horrible, horrific incidents that are occurring in society around us every day. So self-care is a topic that is so important. And, finding the time for ourselves, having our own routine and becoming balanced and centered, like Todd was sharing, it's just a work in progress. I think we all have to keep up on.
And I knew I was starting to slide like a week and a half ago. I could just feel myself. Mine, you talk about sleep. Like I know, when I'm going good, I'm usually up at 4:30 and ready to go. But sleeping in. So we're talking about like 6:30 or 7. Like I knew I was starting to slide. So like I signed up for a hot yoga class, which I haven't taken a hot yoga class in forever, on a Monday morning, which is 6 a.m. Monday morning hot yoga class, because I knew it was going to force me to try to get to bed Sunday night and get back into it. And I really do like hot yoga. I can't do it all the time, but that was the one thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to sign up for this class. It's a 6 a.m. class. I'm going to force myself to get back in my routine. And it happens, again, we're all human. We all make mistakes and we all slide sometimes. Just try to find a way to get yourself back onto the path. Like whatever that is, like again, everybody's different. And what works for me, it's been 48 years of trial and error. People are like, your schedule's insane. I'm like, pick something from here. Some of the stuff that I've done forever, I still do, but then I've tried to add things too, just to help me get back on path when I need to. We're all going to screw up sometimes. Dr. LaRosa, do you have a fail forward moment? I know Todd's, because he talked about it last year. Do you have a fail forward moment?
A fail chord?
Fail forward moment, something you thought was going to sidetrack you, but looking back now, one of the best things that happened to you?
Oh goodness, yes,
There's a lot of
yes.
them.
I was in a master's to doctoral program a long time ago in an area that was just purely, one type of psychology that I had a lot of experience and work in. And my love and passion was more in neuropsychology and psychoeducational testing and all kinds of other things, in addition to behavior analysis. And the program that I was in, I worked really hard in, and I had a very unfortunate circumstance with someone who I thought was a friend of mine who was acting as a mentor that went behind my back and did something absolutely terrible to me, to get one of the professors to rescind a recommendation that they were going to give me. And I confronted that person on the issue, and it was a very personal vendetta type of a thing that made her act that way. And I thought my life was over. I thought I wasn't going in this direction. But then once I was able to pull out of it and really apply to top schools based on my own merit, my own work, and my own grades, I got into a program that was honestly the greatest gift from God that I met mentors there that have touched my life forever and ever and ever. And I was too afraid to get out of the thing that was given to, like, the thing that was a sure thing was what I thought. That's where I thought my potential ended. I thought this was a sure thing. I have a 4.0 average here. I'm going to get in here. I'm going to stay here. And losing that opened up an opportunity of a lifetime for me that has influenced my entire life's work. And so absolutely, I can relate to that. But it's so hard in that moment to keep pushing forward when you think all your hard work has just gone up into flames and there's nothing else for you. And I've never experienced it at the major league level, like Todd, and Chris playing, at a D1 level. That's incredible to have to move on from something like that. And God willing, my son will get the chance, to reach some of those levels like they have.
Tell them there's a lot of good Division III programs out there too.
Yeah,
I see all the
exactly.
NCAA
Yeah, really.
championships.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you, the
I love
D3
it.
World Series that I'll see in June, those teams will be
Oh,
just as plenty good as the D1
Oh, there's no
teams.
bad, but
Sign 'em
all
up.
those teams now.
Find the right
Yeah.
fit. I'll say it a
Baseball,
million
baseball.
times. Find the right
Yeah.
fit. Chris, is yours getting out of coaching?
I can't say that. Yeah, no, I can't say that. I think I miss coaching greatly. I miss the camaraderie. I miss the bus rides. I miss the games. I don't miss the practices as much. I don't miss the quality of life it led me to have. I made some bad decisions at an early age, and that impacted my path. I think I needed to get out of the game at that time in my life just to get right, if you will. But no, I don't think that was, I think that was a lesson in self-discovery, right? Like, I think I had to make a choice for myself to get on the right track. Yeah, I think I'm in the middle of a fail forward moment right now. I think almost daily, right? Like, I'm trying to get through my experience. I'm trying to work on myself. I've taken some time away from work at this point to focus on getting back to the gym and focusing on therapy and things of that sort. So if anything, I would say the last 9 months have been a failure just because I didn't do those things for myself, and I had all the guidance and I had all the perspective given to me, and I had basically the tools thrown at my feet and I didn't use them. I was too focused on my pride. I was too focused on helping others. And so, yeah, I think, getting out of coaching was a lesson in self-discovery, but the last 9 months have been a fail forward moment. And it's really led to the Walking Tall movement, because I don't want anybody else to experience what I experienced, certainly being in a mass shooting. But, what I did to myself over the last 9 months, of putting others before my own good and not focusing on my needs has really been a failure on my part. And I need to fail forward now and focus on myself and focus on the things that matter most, my family, my own well-being, and then the Walking Tall movement.
And Chris
It wasn't a failure,
Go
though.
ahead, Todd.
Yeah, it wasn't a failure. It was a step to your next success,
Yeah.
is what it was, because you can't classify that as a failure. You went through one of the most horrific things that any person has ever been through in thousands of years, right? I mean, we've gone through battle.
Unprecedented.
And
These are unprecedented
unprecedented
time. No one
And
in
you
the
woke up.
history of civilization has had to
Yep.
go through what everyone is going through. Not everyone, but what people are having to go through right now. This is unprecedented times.
Yeah.
Yep. And you kept your boots moving forward.
Yeah.
And you've learned more about yourself, and you have put a lot of people in front of you that's not a failure, brother. That's just you caring for your own mankind and wanting people to be okay. And now you're taking care of yourself. And I think that's probably the nectar is even sweeter right now because you're starting to learn more about yourself.
Yeah. But Chris had the unfortunate
awesome
experience of having to play for me at Iowa in 2003. But we did bond over our love of music. I think that's what bonded us, coach players, that I figured out quickly that he was an avid music fan, as I was. We took my son to see the Rolling Stones at Soldier Field. I was still living in Illinois. But Chris brought out the shirts that I used to design. If you're on, go to YouTube and look at these shirts. I used to design shirts for our players at Iowa. So Coach Dom, luckily his wife worked in a T-shirt shop. Our players cared more about those Christmas T-shirts. That's one that I designed too. Our players cared more about those Christmas T-shirts than they did about anything else. It became a thing. I think I did 3 or 4 of them. But I spent a lot of time designing those things. That was a throwback Iowa deal. But tabula rasa was the thing that we talked about with our team, which clean slate, and trying to wipe it clean.
It's funny you say that, Ryan. We talked a little bit about, and thanks for reminding me. And I talk a lot about it with Todd and Vanetta, and I even talk a lot about it on the show. But if there's one tool that I use to get myself right, it's music. It really is. I'll put my ear pods in, I'll find a good band, and I'll just get lost in the lyrics and in the music itself. And, I talk a lot about it all the time. And given what the news provides as of late, I don't often watch the news. I'm constantly having Amazon Music in my earbuds and finding new bands and going to see live shows as much as I can. And, like Todd, trying to do it safely. But music would be my one tool. And that was definitely one thing that I gravitated to you towards, is your love of music.
Music always brings me back. If I'm down, if I'm out of whack, I will throw music on, whether it's classical music. I studied forever with classical music, so classical music will bring me back. But I like all genres. That's why I like Chris, because all genres are in play. If it sounds good to my ears, I'll listen to it. I don't care if it's new, old, whatever genre. If it sounds good to my ears, I'll listen to it. I have my 30th high school reunion coming up in September. I put a playlist. I was like, I don't know if we'll have a DJ for our reunion, but I threw a playlist together yesterday. It is 7 hours, so I figure if we're somewhere, I'll start it at 5. We'll end that thing at midnight, right on the dot. It is right on the dot, 7 hours. We'll start it at 5.
You haven't changed a bit. Listen,
I was school vice president, but they don't get to run the reunions. But I'm still really good friends with a lot of women from high school, girls from high school, but guys too. But I was on one of my really good friends, Cheryl. She was like my sister growing up. I've been on her for 6 months to get this 30th reunion because it's also the 30th anniversary of our state championship that we won for baseball that year. Single class in Indiana. Wow. It's a big deal. Men's and women's soccer won that year. Tennis won that year. Football went to semi-state. Basketball went to semi-state. So that class was extremely successful and all successful now. But we're all kind of tight. So I have not been on Facebook in years, but we have a 93 MHS group in Facebook. So I was like, I'm taking this thing over. We're going to homecoming. I set the date. I set it. I've got it all planned. We're good. But then I was like, I'm going to put a playlist together too. So
you haven't changed no matter where I've been.
I will not change.
No matter where I've been with you, no matter what establishment it's been, you always have had to head control the jukebox. That's it. No matter, it's the truth.
I still get compliments.
I've been all over the country with him, no matter where we go.
I have people give me money. Bench Tavern is 3 blocks from my house. I'll stop in there and hang out. There's a lot of war vets that hang out at the bench, and I've told them about you guys because they're guys that still deal with PTSD. There are guys in that bar that will drink triple pours of vodka because that's their only way to deal with it. But I've told them about the Walking Tall movement. I've told them, Todd, I had them listen to our podcast. The guys that are really struggling, I was like, hey, you need to go listen to this podcast because he was able to work through some PTSD. And so, again, that's a lot of it is people self-medicate because they don't want to ask for help. And so, again, I'm really glad that you guys are doing what you're doing because hopefully that's a way for people to make healthier choices and also stay safe.
Yeah, and also know they're not alone. That's the biggest thing. I think, anything that we've accomplished, if anything, at this point with the Walking Tall movement is that we've received just, I mean, former players of mine, whether it's been at Valpo or even Iowa, have reached out. Hey, coach, it's so inspiring to see what you're doing. I've been in therapy for the last 3 years, and now I feel like I could tell somebody. Or, hey, coach, I had this experience that I never told anybody about. I'm so glad you're doing it. I'm so glad, So that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to, just provide an opportunity and a platform for people to be vulnerable, to show themselves and others how strong they truly are. Your friends at that establishment, Ryan, and please, share our movement with them. We'd love to help them out. And
I already told
yeah,
him. I told him, I was
yeah.
like, hey, I'm recording with them. When it comes out, make sure you listen. Hey, Chris, do you regret starting a fight with Minnesota your senior year?
Well, no, yes and no.
I do,
Yes.
because they were sleepwalking and you woke
Yeah,
them
I
up,
was
and then we
dealing
got
that
pounded
day.
after that.
My senior. So long story, real quick.
Not smart.
John,
Let a sleeping dog lie.
Yeah,
Yep.
long story, real quick. John Anderson and the University of Minnesota has always had just a tremendous program. And leading up, when I got to the University of Iowa, Minnesota had beaten Iowa like in 12 straight series. It was it was just a bludgeoning every time we played them. And we finally started to get okay. My senior year, I was throwing pretty good. I started against Minnesota, and I was just carving them up. And something happened.
Hey, by the
and
way, Chris threw like 72 miles an hour. No, I'm kidding. But our Friday guy was really good, Nate Johnson.
Nacho.
Him and Glenn Perkins tangled up on Friday night.
Hmm.
Glenn Perkins is a big leaguer.
Yep.
Nacho was really good, pitched pro ball, but I think we lost 2-1. But
2-1.
Nacho was like 89 to 93, really good breaking ball, and so Mal was perfect for Chris to back him up because it was a left-handed change of pace and a little bit, and he had them sleepwalking. But then go ahead, Chris.
Then my anger got the best of me, and I started swearing, and then I ended up hitting somebody on purpose.
It was
and
Rob
woke them up.
Fornasier's son, by
I know.
the way.
I didn't want to say who it was.
I mean,
knew
we
exactly
can
who
add
it
the
was.
details. You hit their third base coach's son in the back,
I had-
and
well,
then
there
went
was a-
right
I had
after
no
their and went
choice.
right after their dugout. It
I
wasn't
walked
like
towards their dugout.
okay, that's
It was-
fine
it-
because they used to tip pitches. They would whistle from the dugout if the catcher
They
set up
cheated.
inside.
They
I like
cheated.
it.
I'm
It was
just
a
gonna call
it was
it
an,
out.
He's
well,
still
this
fired up.
started from the spring. This schedule was set before we started the season. So Coach Dom and I get there. The schedule's already set. We're playing Minnesota in a non-conference weekend in Des Moines in a tournament. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, we're going to play them at the last weekend of the year. But by playing them, we figured out that they would tip catchers setting up inside. And so Mal's got him sleepwalking. Here's the whistle. Hits Matt Fornasier in the
dot
back,
somebody,
which would have been okay. But then he goes after their dugout, and that was.
Then I got lit up, and we lost the game.
And we had a nice
I
conversation after
learned a
that
lot of
about
lessons.
let sleeping dogs lie.
I learned a lot of lessons
Wow.
from baseball, but one of them was let a sleeping dog sleep.
Yep. Let it lie, baby. Let it lie.
All right, where can people find you if they need to reach out to you guys?
Todd, you do a great job of selling us. Have at it.
Oh, well, hopefully it's not a sale. But,
this is not a sale job. This
It's
is
not a sale. I mean,
this
it's
is a
like
public,
I know
this
it-
is a
making
public
people
health
aware.
issue.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is a public health issue.
So we have a website, walkingtallmovement.com, where we have some tremendous resources. If anybody's, feeling anything that's maybe abnormal to themselves on the mental side, it's just, obviously some hotlines. So we've got some information there. We got more coming up on the website. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're everywhere on the Walking Tall podcast. We're on every social channel through Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. So follow us on Walking Tall Movement. Yeah, we're all over. So Chris is doing a great job with trying to really, branch out, but we're new and we're just trying to spread the love. So walkingtallmovement.com.
Dr. LaRosa, if somebody individually wanted to reach out to you, where would they find you?
Well, right now I am the acting clinical executive director and owner for Helping Hands. I sold my practice in 2019, so I am an employee of Helping Hands family right now. So I don't do any private work at the moment. But of course, anyone could Google me anytime and find me just by putting my name in. And I'm here for peer support and for other supportive ventures through the Walking Tall movement.
By the way, this is a record. I feel like Joe Rogan because we went for almost 2 hours. So I appreciate you guys jumping on with me. And Chris, I love you to death.
I love you
thank
too.
you guys for
Thank
jumping
you.
on with me.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan,
Thank you for
having
having us, Ryan. We love ABCA. So
Yeah, thank you.